Hello, I'm Alice Hiller, and it's a huge pleasure to welcome you all to this Voicing Our Silences evening with Julie Irigaray and I. At the time of recording in December 21, I'm aware we've all been through a tough couple of years with no easy end in sight. Julie and I have therefore decided to base this evening around resourcing our work in lean times. We'll share ideas about how to nurture creativity without access to all the opportunities and freedoms we once took for granted. Some of our material isn't easy, and if anything is difficult for you, we've put the Mind website in the chat bar. We're each going to perform 2 sets of poems. Between them, we'll talk about how they came into being, and we'll each set you a prompt. Our prompts are designed to work together. And then at the end, we'll throw the evening open to questions from the audience. Because this Voicing Our Silence event is being recorded in the run-up to the winter solstice, we've both had the idea of making our sets so they move from darkness to light. I'm keeping a lit candle beside me as a symbol of resistance through witness and inspiration. For all of us, the Voicing Our Silences community has been a source of light, solidarity, and mutual creative support, as I know it has been also for those of you who watch the recordings later, and we welcome you as well. I feel that creative support every time I talk to Julie, who is my dear friend, as well as a cherished and brilliant poet. Julie's deeply original, rigorous, compassionate work spans multiple worlds and periods in history. It always fills me with awe, and I'm sure you'll feel the same when you hear her incredible new poem, Red Card, which is being premiered for us. Just before Julie reads, I'll say a few words about her many stellar achievements. First among them, the publication of her debut pamphlet, Whalers, Witches and Gauchos by 9 pens, and there's going to be the link in the chat if you'd like to buy it. Befitting her well-travelled muse, Julie's poems have appeared exceptionally internationally. In America, Ireland, I'm having to read off the list, Italy, Mexico, Canada, Singapore, and South Korea. No one in our groups can match Julie for international publications. In the UK, she's been published in the Rialto, Ambit, Magma, Stand, and Dyslexia. She was commended in the 2020 Ambit Magazine Poetry Prize and selected in 2018 as one of the 50 best new British and Irish poets by Eyewear. And she has a shed load of other distinguished awards, but we're not going to be here for several hours. So I'm just giving you some highlights. Anyway, that's enough of a wind up. I'm now going to hand over to Julie Irigaray, and she's going to give you her amazing poems.
Thank you so much, Alice. I know you managed to make me blush, so thank God you can't see it really, but and I'm so glad you managed to pronounce my name correctly, by the way. It's always nice to hear. So the 3 poems for my first set are all included in my pamphlet, so some of you might be familiar with them. I'm going to start with the Basque Whaler. The Basque Whaler. I've always wanted to drown. This 6 months away each year, hunting whales off Iceland and Newfoundland are killing me. I've always wanted to drown. It should be easy. I can't swim, and she could wipe us out in 1 second. The movement of her tail, her mermaid singing exercises, the V-shaped blow as a landmark. I take no pleasure in harpooning this creature of chaos and harmony. I've always wanted to drown. When the others chop her up, I stay in the quarters to avoid the stench of blubber When will I see the Bay of San Sebastian again? I'm homesick, seasick, sick of a taste of salt and vomit. The ocean is my talisman, but I've always wanted to drown. So, as we'll discuss later, the next poem uses places which actually really existed, which were World War I battles. So this is 6 war letters. Main de Massige, 26th of September, 1915. We live in perforated burrows, the landscape's wrinkles. The trees are stakes gutting the ground. Above us, meteored bullets whistle, digging furrows on our foreheads. Champagne, 9th of January, 1916. I've sculpted a bucket out of a shell and chiseled, made in Champagne, 1916 vintage. We'll drink in it once a Kaiser kicks the bucket. Verdun, 27th of May, 1916. Men are inflammable torches. They want to be heroes without grasping that war, at best, scorches. Women give birth, men only give the death blow. Chemin des Dames, 15th of April, 1917. Tomorrow I'll be a man. For my 21st birthday, I'll be offered a battle on a plateau called the Lady's Path. I imagine you, a Monet model, crossing this expressionist painting of pus and mud. Chemin des Dames, 4th of May, 1917. Artillery shots are the earth's heartbeats. This morning, its pulse and might got erratic, so I held your rosary and told my beads mechanically. All these years, I believed I'd forgotten my prayers the way I'd forgotten God. Chemin des Dames, 20th of May, 1917. Will you still love me when I'll become a cubist collage, when pieces of my face will be glued together? We call these men gueules cassées, broken faces. Better for you to end up a widow. And my last poem for this set is called Krieg. And I don't think you need to know nothing about it. So this is Krieg. Despite his wooden leg, my great-grandfather always volunteered to climb up trees and pluck cherries or chestnuts. He was the most agile of the family, as light as a sparrow. During the Second War, he was the one hiding legs of ham in the forest by hanging them on the highest trees so the German wouldn't confiscate them. My great-grandfather was the only one in the village who received the newspaper every day. He paid for the subscription with his veteran disability pension. When the gangrene spread and his leg was cut off for the second time, my great-grandfather begged the surgeon not to amputate it too high. He was a farmer, and no woman would want to marry an invalid. I found his file in the military archives. The army officer wrote after his amputation, leg cut 2/3 high, can't stand the equipment, imaginary pain of the amputee. After the Great War, my great-grandfather inherited the family farm at the top of a steep hill, a barren plot of land, a Basque wuthering heights nobody wanted, let alone someone with a missing leg. The region was occupied during the Second War. One summer, my great-grandfather and his son moved their cattle to higher pastures for the transhumance. They reached a point where the Germans blocked the road. As his son was trying to negotiate their passage, the middle-aged officer pointed at his leg and uttered, "Krieg?" My great-grandfather didn't speak a word of German, and the officer didn't speak a word of French, so he repeated several times, "Krieg? Krieg?" The officer's face lit up. He gestured towards the wooden leg, patted his own chest. "Krieg! Krieg!" Krieg, a magic word my great-grandfather deciphered in the German's eyes and translated as, "Yes, I was there too 30 years ago. I was buried alive. They dug me up, but my friends are still eating cornflower roots. I lost my job, my fiancée too." My great-grandfather hesitated, then finally nodded. The officer barked orders at the soldiers. who let my great-grandfather and his son pass with the cattle to let them graze in peace. So this is it for my first set. So now I'm going to introduce Alice Hiller. It's my great pleasure. So writer and activist Alice Hiller's debut, Bird of Winter, gives creative witness to being groomed and sexually abused in childhood and finding healing beyond this crime. Author of the T-shirt book, Alice blogs, podcasts, and interviews about saying the difficult thing creatively at alicehiller.info. She founded the Voicing Our Silences collective, as you can see, and she was shortlisted for the 2021 Forward Prizes for Best First Collection. And I've heard her performance was really amazing on that evening. And to be honest with you, I've got two versions. I've got two copies of Bird of Winter because I've got the original intact one and the heavily annotated version because there's so many things. I really read it on a regular basis because there's so many things I found amazing in terms of craft, so many tips I want to teach my students and I personally love as a reader. So it's really a great pleasure, a great honor to be reading with you tonight, Alice. So I hand it to you now.
Hastily unmuting myself. I was so captivated by your reading that I quite forgot that I was muted. Thank you for those incredible poems, Julie. It was really wonderful. I can never hear you read too often, and your work just comes so alive for me when you read it. Yes, and it's a joy to be appearing with you. And I put some French poems in because we have that in common. And anyways, as Julie mentioned, Bird of Winter gives creative witness to my childhood experience of being groomed and sexually abused by my mother and finding healing beyond this. My first set will go down into the darkness of this crime, which impacts millions of us around the world. My second set will rise up into the light of reclamation. To give us all strength, I'll begin in a place of love on the beach below my French grandmother's house in Normandy with bain de mer or sea swimming. Bain de mer. Grown in an unconstrained bed to navigate the veins of childhood, I cleanse in salt water, bonne maman. Rattling Dieppe shingle, the tide carries back our morning swims together. Dew on spider webs, gates shawled in mist, the startled hydrangeas. 84, your robe zipped, sure-footed as a penguin, me, your chick kept close, breasting the ice floe, lifted 2 breathing corks in the churn of the channel. Pistol, my next poem, is also set partly in Normandy. It witnesses via my medical notes to the darkness rising in my young life through my mother's grooming of me from my earliest beginnings. Pistol has been well apart from German measles while in France. Difficult with medicines, aggressive and difficult with other children. Bites and scratches, difficult to get her off to sleep at night, i.e. spoiled. Ovule, your tummy, a hardening ball of ache. Stigma, Papa's photo shows you, aged 2, waist deep in a field of French buttercups. with your red anorak zipped and the sky holding you. Growing up, my grandmother, my bonne maman, continued to be a place of refuge. She was in her 80s, however. She couldn't protect me as my father's health deteriorated and the grooming by my mother intensified. 3 small shrines found still upright. Bonne maman, the rosebuds on the cup I sip your morning tea from are faded by years of washing. Astringent jasmine floats a lemon sun up from your breakfast tray, even as the sky clouds over and your bedroom mirror flowers with salt garlands foaming off the storm. My father died when I was 8, in November 1972. The penetrative abuse which followed hit me with all the impact of Vesuvius erupting. In the vineyard, a hoer's mattock slants abandoned, where the fugitives fall face down, their arms cradling their heads. Between the benches of the triclinium, veins open along the stems that trained them, and tunics ruck up, bearing buttocks to the slow pine, unfurling its umbrella of death. This is another midwinter memory, in every sense of the word, of my mother and I in December 1972, not long after my father died. Circular. The ball is me, caught in lank winter grass, slick as the hair between the legs in the bedroom which the round moon peeks into, then looks away. As a child, like many in my position, I believed there was no escape. The penetrative abuse continued until I was 13 and stopped eating. Juju. First time released, I unspooled, then dropped, but her quick tug wound my nub back up, reeling me in until my string could not slip, and I climbed unaided to the wrist she flicked. The final poem of my first set is a redemption song. It begins with my father's death, but remembers the lasting light of his love in my life, which would help me reclaim myself beyond the abuse. Libation. Brussels was a grey signet. The November morning I was driven home from school before break, and Mummy sat up straight on the sofa in her yellow swanbeak dress to tell me my papa was dead. But when she opened the Bible picture book to read me a story, I could not hear her because wild wings were beating around my head. I am the shoots from Papa's buried roots, growing underground where no one can see me. Crisp rabbit's ears driving out of darkness. My white leaves sprout from his old stump. When I am awake, I love chicory, in French called endive, bitter, cooked or raw, and harvested by torchlight. I eat the food of the dead, dressed with vinaigrette. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alice, for sharing these essential poems. So I think I'm going to be very selfish. I'm going to ask you about my favorite poem of this first set. I would like you to tell us more about Libation, even if it's the last one, it's my favorite. So I can't wait to hear how you wrote it.
Libation came from the idea of the Romans. They used to go to the grave and they would pour wine into the grave on the anniversary of the death to honor their dead. And because Romans were into high tech like plumbing, they actually had special funnels built into some graves for the wine pouring. So the idea was that a libation was a way of joining the living and the dead. This sort of stream of water, this stream of wine joined them. And I thought of my libation as a double libation. I was pouring a libation to my father's memory, but I was also pouring a libation to the memory of my child self who was resisting and who let me be alive now. And because I researched Pompeii and Herculaneum, I read about Roman funerary practices, but I also Googled endive online. I lived in Brussels from 4 till 8. Endive is like practically a national religion. It's such an important vegetable. They're very beautiful. They're these sort of white, mysterious, magical things. And I was really interested that an endive is harvested and then the root is laid out in the sun to dry, and then it's reburied, and what we eat is actually the sprouts coming off that root underground. So I researched that poem in books about Rome, ancient Rome, and I also did online research about endive cultivation. So although it's a poem that travels, I only traveled in my imagination to write it. I'm going to come back and ask you now about the Basque whaler. Tell me about, I love the sort of physicality of that poem, and I know that it speaks to your Basque heritage, but just, yeah, tell me something about how that came into being.
Yes, so I started writing in when I was living in the UK, and I think it was at the time when I couldn't come back home in the immediate future, and I knew I always wanted to write a poem about the fact that in the early modern period, the Basque traveled to Canada and Iceland for 6 to 9 months per year to hunt whales, which was a very difficult job. So I didn't know how to tackle the subject really for an Anglophone audience, not to sound too didactic and boring. So, and I couldn't go back to the Basque country, even if there's a beautiful Basque museum in San Sebastian. But I Googled online, I don't know if I was looking for something in particular, I Googled it and I found a National Geographic scan from a previous issue, I guess, in English, overmore, which was nice. And there was loads of illustrations about the Basque Harbor at the time, about the ship where they stored, you know, the whale, about everything. It was simple and interesting. So I thought, okay, so, and I've got vocabulary in English, which is nice. So I'm going to reuse it in the poem. And I was really luck, pure luck, you know, Googling something and finding a super interesting resources about it. Because as I say, at the time, I couldn't go back to the San Telmo Museum in San Sebastian, but I also came back later and I slightly modified the poem to double check, you know, that the information in it was accurate. But yes, so that's for the genesis of it, let's say.
No, and I think, I mean, when I'm looking at it again, what's interesting is your research created a structure, and it's a really good, model for people who are looking to resource their work to just write beyond their direct experience. But what's also interesting is it's very heartfelt. When will I see the Bay of San Sebastian again? I am homesick, seasick, sick of the taste of salt and vomit. The ocean is my talisman, but I've always wanted to drown. I mean, it seems to me that you've infused something that is sort of personal and existential, and also about the condition of exile and the condition of no longer belonging. So you haven't just, done a piece of research by numbers, but it's actually the research has become a sort of structure for holding something that a lot of us would relate to who have grown up in more than one place. Is that a fair reading?
Yeah, absolutely. Because especially I think more or less when I wrote it was when I moved back to the UK, but to work. So I thought, okay, you won't be able to come back for several months because you won't be able to take some weeks off. And it was particularly difficult at that time. I felt really homesick. So I think it's no coincidence I wrote that poem at that time and saying, when will I see this Bay of San Sebastian again? You're absolutely right about it, Alice. And what really intrigued me, you did it in Pistol, but you did it in other poems in the book. You used your medical notes and you integrated them into poems, and it works really nicely. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, and I kind of need to almost flash warning, warning, warning at this point. If you have a complex history, and I'm talking very straight and very serious, be incredibly careful about handling your medical notes. I was extremely wise. I waited about 30 years before requesting them. And then even when I got them, I very sensibly didn't open the package from the doctor for another 18 months. And I am mocking myself, but I'm also serious, because when I did open it, what I found there was very, very difficult and also very, very precious, because I have no contact with my family of origin. I don't have anything from my childhood. I have no records. I have no photos. So finally, I had an objective record of a time that only existed in my memory. And what was very, very interesting was this, that poem was, the stuff I used in that poem was 18 months, 2 years, to see that my behaviors were really infected from very, very young. And then I could sort of, because I lived in different countries, quite a lot of the notes have been lost. But, and then in fact, the National Health have now lost all the paper copies of the earlier notes because they wouldn't give them to me. But there was enough to sort of track it through. And it felt like this incredible helping hand was coming to support me, because those of us who've been subjected to sexual abuse very often don't get that much support from our families. But against that, whether you're looked after, whether there are doctors examining you, whether you go to school, there are sort of people from, state-sponsored organizations that do actually see you and notice you. And I could see that, doctors had recorded, often quite compassionately, that things were going wrong in my life. And I'm working on a memoir where I'll use many more of these notes. And I could track my anorexia, I could track the different, somatizations of the abuse that I could remember. And I got, age dates on them. But what was also very, very tough was that I then saw this very judgmental comments I had one compassionate GP in my teens. I had a couple who were very judgmental, very hostile. And that was one of the things that absolutely lit my fire of witness, because I thought I was judged so wrongly. I acted inappropriately. I fell out of education. I got pregnant at 17, all the sort of classic things that actually happen to people with disrupted childhoods. And there were all these snide comments, and I just thought, you know, you don't know what's happened. This was the 70s. Childhood sexual abuse was not recognised. And I thought, you know, I was so harshly judged by some people when I should have been helped. And I thought I really have to speak up and speak out, really, particularly about adolescence, particularly about how people who have been sexually abused as children act out that trauma in adolescence. And so those medical notes were critical at so many levels. And as I say, you know, if I ever waver in my commitment, I just need to open my medical file and I kind of strap on my 9-league boots and load my pistol and head off again. So yes, you know, and yes, so that's they're very poor. But if any of you have complex pasts and you're thinking of getting hold of your medical notes, really, you know, put some support in place, and be very cautious, because you might find some things there which will be difficult to handle. Anyway, now I get to ask you. I as you can see, I'd much rather talk about your work.
No. We're interested. We're all listening, so no worries.
But anyway, so yeah, the next poem you read was 6 War Letters, which I just love. It has so much detail. I mean, I think you achieve in 6 War Letters what you achieve with the Basque Whaler, that sense that you take factual information, but you really turn it into poetry. We live in perforated burrows, the landscape's wrinkles, the trees are stakes gutting the ground, above us meteored bullets whistle, digging furrows on our foreheads. Tell me about your alchemy, Julie. How did you get, I mean, yeah, what was the basis? And then how did you manage this extraordinary act of transformation?
I really struggled to write this poem because I didn't know from which point of view I should write it. Initially, it was a dialogue between the woman actually was supposed to reply to the man in postcards. And I realized after a while it didn't work for whatever reason. But I think at that time I was just browsing military archives because I was doing a lot of research about my family during World War I, because literally all the men in my family, great-grandfathers, great-granduncles fought. And so I managed to find online military archives. And I'm going to talk about it for the next poem as well. But yeah, and I realized lots of my great-granduncles in particular died age 20 or were all age 18. So basically when they're underage. So, and I actually realized, because, you know, when I put the battle and the place, I wanted to be accurate historically. So I did a bit of online research. And by doing that, I realized that one of my great-grandfather was literally 21st. It was in his 21st birthday at the beginning of one battle he fought for. And I find the coincidence so awful, over more because he was supposed to become a man at the time. He became a man age 21. So that part, for example, of the poem is based on someone, and thanks to archive research. And I guess also family interviews, if I can put it this way, you know, interviewing his daughter-in-law, because my granny, for example, she kept some of his the shells each years old, basically, as I mentioned the poem, really. And so we've got this artifact at home. It's really nice to see, you know, physical archives of some sort, if you can call them this way. So I think, yeah, it's a mix of online research, talking to people who knew those men who fought, and discovering things actually about them. Even if, you know, military archives are very factual, you discover where they were born, at what age they fought, and which battles, etc., which I found fascinating, really, because I discovered these things. And the emotion was really natural when I discovered, for example, that great-grandfather of mine was only enrolled age 18, and he did all the battles for 4 years, all the main ones on the French side, and was 21, you know, when the big one on the French side was fought. And yes, so I guess the emotion is genuinely, you know, is sincere. That's why maybe, as you say, it's so frank, I guess.
It's a fantastic, I mean, it's just a fantastic, you know, poetry sequence. It just, every time I read it, every time you read it, it really moves me. It's incredibly powerful.
So for me, what else? Yes, I think you told me In the Vineyard was inspired by an exhibition of a museum catalogue.
That's
an exhibition. Yes. So tell us more. I like exhibitions a lot because they're so inspiring. So I'd like to know what you got from it.
The British Museum had a really fantastic Pompeii and Herculaneum exhibition, which I went to, and most of my collection really sort of responds to it. But they also have these wonderful, the catalogue was really richly illustrated, and it described the different places where, when in Pompeii, people were overwhelmed as they fled, and just overwhelmed by this sort of soft ash. And as their bodies deliquesced, then they left these voids in the ash, and archaeologists from the 18th century onwards put plaster in them. And then we found these fleeing people. And so I kind of read with great interest about it in the museum catalogue. And then I also, it was very persuasive for me because my past has in a way left voids inside me, and making the poems, I'm sort of, pouring a substance in to find the shape that was just emptiness before. So again, like you, it was a piece of research that spoke to something very deep in me. Now I'm just going to ask you quickly, have we asked about, we've got Craig to ask about. I'm just, before, I'm going to set a prompt in a minute, but yes, we're going to go back to the war, and back to your great-grandfather. And again, what I love about this poem, it feels like I'm reading a whole short story in it. It's incredibly, you give me a scene which you weren't at and which I weren't at, and I feel that I'm there. And by being there, I can sort of enter all the complexity of of these two people, these two war veterans in another war. So again, just tell me how that came into being.
Yes, so this one is about my other great-grandfather on my father's side, and I really discovered randomly that on my dad's side, so it was more inland in the Basque Country, so they're still occupied, in the occupied zone. But I discovered, because it's so much in the countryside near the mountains, it was a great place to help people like British soldiers or Jews or whatever to run away, to cross the mountains, to run away to Spain. So I read a book about that, about all what we call passeurs, these men who by night were helping people to run away. And that's how I discovered that some people were hanging legs of hams in the forest to hide, not to have them confiscated, because the Nazis were confiscating food from people, And so yes, I discovered that. I also did, again, this military archives research. And what I discovered about this great-grandfather, so I knew he had been amputated twice, but I didn't know the circumstances. And what I really loved, I didn't include it in the poem because I thought it would be a bit of dark humor. They actually checked in 1942, so when the battles were over and he was well into his 60s, that they had checked about his leg. So I don't know if he had expected him in his 60s to fight again, or to check if his leg had grown back. But I was just, okay, you just see that they really considered people as piece of meat. And you see it in the comment, it's a real comment, that he can't stand the equipment, as if you were making a fuss. And imaginary pain, I found that, oh my God, so they don't even believe him when he says he's suffering. So that's for the military archives bit. I find it really rich with kind of comments you can read, from the army, the history book as well. And again, I interrogated my dad because my dad knew him, it was his grandfather. And for example, I thought he was living in Argentina just before the war. So I thought he came back just for the war to fight, but no, he had to come back just 6 months before because he had it on his military service, and lack of luck, the war struck. So even that, it's interesting to search archives because you discover things about, you check your family history, family memories, and sometimes people have wrong memories. And that's what actually I like to briefly talk about your poems. I know you write about childhood memories a lot. Do you always check? Do you ask people sometimes, or do you try to check on the internet, I don't know, of family photographs in the archives if your memories are correct or not, Alice?
Well, you see, I have no one to ask. I have no contact with any member of my family or of origin, and I haven't for more than sort of 20 years now. And that's why the medical notes are so useful. I can do I can research factual things.
Yes, that's what I was thinking of. Sorry, factual things. Double check or not.
But yes, and I can sort of I can do things. My father was a diplomat, so up until he died, I can look at his career and things like that, because that was sort of logged. But the emotional stuff I have to just look inside for. But anyway, I'm aware that we are now, we need to keep faintly to time. We're going to be generous with our time because we want to share a great evening with you all. But I think we're going to now swap to my prompt. So, and the aim of my prompt is, if everyone can find their piece of paper and their pen to write on, I am going to start I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, here we are. And share. So great, and it's worked. So the idea of my prompt is just that we're going to do 5 time steps, and it's just to really get you going. The prompt is, you're going to write in the shape of a compass, which is why I needed a piece of paper. And the each of the prompts, I'm going to say it, but it's also going to be on the screen share. So and I'll talk you through it. So there's lots of guidance along the way, and you should respond to any of the prompts in the way that feels right to you. We're not trying to write a whole poem. We're just trying to check in with yourself and open new directions to go deep with later. And because it's been a pretty tough day and a pretty tough week, I thought we'd start by just doing 2 in-breaths and 2 out-breaths. And as someone with a history of trauma, it's an incredibly valuable thing to do. And all you want to do is get your feet flat on the floor, your bum comfortably on whatever you're sitting on. And we're going to do 2 breaths in, 2 breaths out, and I'm just going to talk you through them. So first of all, close your eyes and start to breathe out slowly and fully, letting anything you don't want or need pass out of you with your out breath. Now breathe in fully and deeply, right down into your tummy. Fill yourself with peaceful energy with the in-breath. Breathe out again, slowly and fully, letting anything you don't want pass out of you. Breathe in again, fully and deeply, right down to your tummy, filling yourself with new energy. Now, comfortably, let your breathing return to normal, but just breathe slowly and comfortably and deeply through this exercise. And our next step, when everyone's ready, is to draw the frame for your creative compass. And I'm going to put a drawing on the screen that you can see. You want to draw a circle about 1/3 of the way down your page with space on either side. Fill up the middle third of your page with a circle, like on my drawing. And then you want to put north, east, south, and west coming out from it, and just light dividers between those between the areas. So you've got a circle and 4 sort of triangles. That's what you're going to be writing in. I'm just going to leave that up for a moment, and have your camera on or off while we're doing the prompt. Be whichever feels comfortable for you. I'll keep mine on. Now, I'm going to read, just let anyone, I'm going to read the prompt for the center circle, and then the 2 minutes will start when I finish reading it, and you'll have it up on the screen. So everyone just get their compass ready. I'm leaving it up while I'm reading it, and then I'll switch to the prompt. Prompt 1, setting your creative compass. A compass can be the range of a voice, something for drawing circles, a boundary or enclosing line, an instrument to determine direction. Taking any of these meanings, which will be up on the screen for you to see, within the center circle of your compass, write one or more things you want to explore creatively. They might be project titles, images, places, memories, hopes for new journeys, names, ideas, peoples, moods, shapes. You can put anything you want in the center of your circle. It's your compass, and it's going to be, these are your starting points for future journeys. I'm now going to move up to this prompt, and I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes and just write in the center of your circle what you would like to explore creatively. And it can be very fragmentary. It doesn't have to be anything big. You're just putting some starting points into this circle to get yourself going. And it might just be one word. This is just a new place for you to start. Right, that's us. I'm going to read you the next prompt, which is north. You can continue to think about the center of your compass, because I'm going to start the 2 minutes for north after I've read you the prompt. North light is valued by artists because it's cool and constant. In terms of weather, in the northern hemisphere, the northern winds and climates are thought of as colder and harsher. In the southern hemisphere, it's the reverse. Working out from the center of your compass, write some northerly aspects of what you choose to explore creatively. They might be weather, mood, geography, place names, colors, memories. You're just looking for starting points. You'll be able to take this further later. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to write some northerly aspects of your creative journey. Now we're on to the south. We're getting warmer, at least in the northern hemisphere. So our next prompt is going to be, you're going to write in the bottom section, the south section of your compass. South is traditionally the opposite of north. The southern hemisphere, the Antarctic, not the Arctic, southern Africa, sometimes warm weather sunshine. Working down from the center of your compass, write some southerly aspects of what you choose to explore creatively. Again, they might be weather, mood, geography, place names, colors, memories. Everything is good. That's the end of south. We're now going to travel across to east. Again, I'll read the prompt first. Writing your compasses east. For Europe, east is the cold wind blowing in from Russia, also historically the source of new ideas, and it's the place from which the sun rises. Working out from the center of your compass, write some easterly aspects of what you choose to explore creatively. Again, they might be weather, mood, geography, place names, colors, memories. Everything you choose is good. Sorry, that's us for East, and I'm struggling with my timer as always. So, oh, it's getting very, very excited. But that's just to cheer us all up and know that we're nearly at the end. So our final prompt is writing your compasses west, helped by my noisy timer. So west is the direction into which the sun sets, the warm, wet wind off the Atlantic that brings rain and growth for Europe, but sometimes rather more than we want. The start of the instruction, go west for adventure. Working out from the center of your compass, write some westerly aspects of what you choose to explore creatively. Again, they might be weather, mood, geography, place names, colors, memories. Everything you choose is good. Right, well, my thing that I can't control is being very noisy and telling us that we have now got to the end. It's doing a little sort of song of jubilation. The next, the final stage of your creative compass, you should do a couple of days later. I'm going to send you the PDF of the instructions if you want to follow it up. And but what I recommend you do is that you take some words from your compass, you put them on your clean sheet of paper, and then you see how they want to speak to each other. You could draw lines between them. You could write connecting passages. They might be fragments, the beginning of fragments. They might be stanzas within a poem. But the idea is just to see how they come together, but leave it for a couple of days before you do that. And as I say, the instructions are going to be on the recording of this, and I'm also going to send them out as a PDF. Now, before I introduce Julie to read, because so she can come out of her writing space, I thought I'd just ask, would anyone like to say how they got on with this experience? Did anyone enjoy writing a creative compass?
I did.
Excellent.
Although it's interesting, I actually found it more like a kind of was like a coaching exercise. You know, I was very much thinking about my aims for the year ahead, and so it wasn't so much like, you know, like I don't think what I would use to write a poem, but I'd use it to, you know, I like the idea in a couple of days of using it to create a map of like a sense of where I want to go over the next year and what my priorities are and things like that. So I found it very, very useful for that. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, that was the idea, was just everything is good. And it's sometimes actually good to like make a symbolic space on the page for our intentions, which we can then, when I tested it out for myself, I found I used it to plan out a writing project. And so it was just like, I think, you know, that was the idea, was just to have a, you know, to make a space. Does anyone else have any comments or any thoughts they'd like to share about working with it?
I agree with Joanna about the coaching aspect of it, because it made me realize I have a series of poems I've wanted to write about, and I was a bit procrastinating, and your compass exercise made me realize, okay, I need to set myself clear goals and I need to go with it and maybe try to explore new things that you suggested. And yes, off we go.
Yeah. Well, that was the idea of this workshop. You know, we're all a hard place and we're just trying to like come and give each other some support and input. And so that's a really great outcome.
Can I say something, Alice?
Please, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, one, I apologize for arriving late, and I've got another poetry group which is having a Christmas party right now, so I'm going to go back to them and say goodbye and then come back here. But I found that compass, I was quite surprised that every answer was so spontaneous. It was just there in front of me. As soon as you asked the question, it was just bang. That's what you're doing, you know, that's what's happening over warming winter. That's what's happening in the West. I was very surprised, because often I think about these things and I write an answer, but that one was just right in front of my eyes and I wrote it down. I really enjoyed it.
That's absolutely incredible. No, well, as I say, I just think there is something about using paper, using our bodies, using our hands, using the real, that sort of lets us sometimes get a bit, not only be controlled by our mental processes, but just react quite spontaneously. And that can be very sort of clear, you know, and direct. So that's really wonderful. Yes, does anyone else have any comments?
I found the time frames really helpful, and how each segment was kind of self-contained but also linked to the other parts, which I think made me a lot less judgmental about what I'd written, because I knew that we were moving on again. So thank you. The first thing I've written in a long time. So thank you, Alice.
Result, yay, that's fantastic.
Result.
That's just great. No, but that's what you want to hear. That's, you know, that's just amazing stuff. We know that's really lovely. And I think there are so many things that can make it difficult to write at the moment, that, you know, anything that makes it easy has to be an advantage. So that's really lovely. Great. Brilliant. I'm getting a wonderful message from Chaucer. So fantastic. Does anyone else want to say anything? And otherwise we'll move on to Julie's second set. And I've already told you what a fantastic person is. She's actually proved that she's even better than I could describe. So I am going to, I'm now going to make sure I can pin Julie, add pin, and that's absolutely it. Brilliant. I've got Julie pinned, and I'm going to say, here is the wonderful Julie Irigaray giving you her second set.
Thank you, Alice. So the first poem is in two voices. So actually, because I don't have great talents, I'm not an actor, I cannot modulate my voice so greatly. I'm just going to maybe raise different hands to indicate that it's the two voices talking one after the other. There's the voice of a child and the voice of a mother. So no, I'm not going to dance a Macarena. I'm just going to try to indicate you who is reading. So this is Red Card. Tonight is a final of the FIFA World Cup and France is playing against Italy. I'm watching the match with Granny while Mom is watching it in a psychiatric hospital. I hate football, but there's nothing else to do. The guy who believes he's Jesus started preaching in front of us, in front of a TV, but we made him fuck off. The French are wearing white because the Italians are dressed in navy blue. They've even stolen our colors. I can't hear the commentators. Karin keeps on talking to me about the fetus the doctors never removed inside her belly, the one shriveled like an autumn leaf. Materazzi insults Zidane with a figlio di puttana to push him over the edge. My husband refused to meet a psychiatrist. My mother and daughter come every day. I told the staff I wanted to be alone. Zidane gives him a swift headbutt. Red card! Zidane is sent off. We all know each other's pathology. Viviane hears voices. Francois tried to take his own life after his wife left with a baby. Laetitia talks about her bipolar disorder. I make sure my daughter avoids the paedophile in the hall. Bloody Italians, such cheaters. Granny's outraged too. I've been with her for a week, and when mom is back, we'll leave the three of us together without dad. The psychiatrist never utters a word. He just gives pills. I can only count on myself. The two teams are tied. They play extra time. I knew I was ill, but I thought the social services would take my daughter away if I went to rehab. Trezeguet misses his penalty, so the team loses a shootout. Dad told me mom went to the hospital because of her nerves. Nerves have always failed the French. The first days, I refused to get out of my room. I convinced myself I wasn't like the other patients. My friends call me the comeback queen. I'm going to leave this hospital after 2 weeks and I'll never relapse. The next poem is inspired by Séraphine de Senlis, who was a French painter who could have been more famous. Unfortunately, she had some success, but after the 1929 economic crash, she lost popularity. So this is based on Séraphine de Senlis' life. Divine Séraphine. My parents gave me the name of an angel because I have a mission to accomplish. I paint leaves that turn into flames, little tongues, shreds of flesh, insects hiding behind a jungle of eyes, the devil's face. I talk to trees. They tell me stories of nearby wars and gory lullabies. I make my own colors, oxblood from the butchers for red, mud from the pond's shore for ochre. I steal turpentine from my employers and the wax of church candles to fix pigments. The Virgin Mary will forgive me this sin. I sing hymns to her when I paint. They call my work naive or primitive, like the Douanier Rousseau's, but I'm not a simpleton. My art dealer says the texture of my paintings is unraveled. And finally, the last poem is really appropriate. We're going to talk about it because it's in relation about not being able to travel to where I would have liked to travel to this past 2 years. So this is Via Domitia. And I end up frog leaping at 10 p.m. on the Via Domitia, the ancient road which connected Italy to Spain. We are at a crossroads here. The Via Aquitania is a few meters away, the missing link between the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, west and south. This place was built to be stamped on. I often feel this way. How could the Romans walk on these axe-cut rocks for thousands of miles without twisting their ankles? Is this what progress looks like? Some are large enough to be a tombstone or a bull's shoulder blade. If I head southwards, will I reach Spain? If I head eastwards, can I return to Italy? I would come back to Bologna through the Via Emilia, explore the Via Appia catacombs again. I long for the days when travelers could be robbed and stabbed on their way to Rome. Now everyone is scared. I haven't prayed Mercury for a year. Who needs this protection where there's nowhere to travel to? The god of boundaries has an apt name, Terminus. On the Via Domitia, I look for a way out. I was Roman in another life, always in movement, fighting and conquering. I cannot be tame. If I put down roots, I rot. Set me free, Mercury, or I'll oxidize like a bronze statue that remained under the sea for 20 centuries. Set me free, and I worship you from Herculaneum to Londonum, Italica to Lutetia. So here we go.
That was another incredible set of poems, and they were new. I was so
brand new. It's exclusive tonight.
Oh, yeah, no, it's just so exciting, really outstanding.
So actually, I'm really looking forward to your second set as well, because some poems, you know, of ours are responding to each other, and another favorite of mine is in it. So please, Alice, go for it. I'm looking forward to listening to you, as we all are.
Great. Well, I'm just going to, there we are. I'm going to turn down my light so I can be light in the darkness. Ooh. And yes, thank you so much, Julie. Having entered the darkness of my childhood, this second set of poems will rise up into the light of witness. I begin with a dream from December 2018. It replays that month in years gone by. The holly tree. Some nights the holly tree prickles me awake. Its eyes are red berries pecked by birds. The holly tree claims my veins for its sap. The holly tree wants me of the chill clay. The holly tree says, follow the moon's path in bare feet. The holly tree lays me a robin amongst brown leaves. In the grove, my clothes are lifted and my nectar is drunk. In the grove, my body must join the priestess, skin on skin, while we roll and we wrestle, me so small, her so big. Writing Bird of Winter, I was able to turn these very difficult times into a force for transformation. And having been overwhelmed by the volcano, I become the volcano. Vesuvius, blast apart your peak. Shatter the rock straight up. Surge black rivers from your veins. Make bright night, heavy day. Pour down ash and pumice. Muffle our streets with mourning. Press your lips against those who turn their faces. Enter our towns, lean against our houses until walls buckle, windows cry glass. Shift this stifling stone, billow forth the wrecks we hold, scour out our hurt, let grief melt the ash, until vines climb your slopes again, until birdsong is heard. Like an immense tree trunk, it was projected into the air and opened out with branches. Pliny the Younger. To heal, I've needed to learn to care for the child selves who travel with me, as is the case for many of us with childhood trauma. Benediction, holistic conservation. Dog I have loved, bless my face with a small curl of your pink tongue. Identify patterns of deterioration, areas of reconstruction, previous interventions. I hold your foreleg, inch of white fur, shaved square. Treat, clean and consolidate surfaces, fill cracks and voids, re-adhere flaking paint. Time floats, lick me again. 3, reintegrate. Minimally in-paint areas of loss and abrasion. Use neutral tones in lacunae to reinstate legibility. Do not attempt to reconstruct missing elements. The fluid enters as harebells on the high downs. 4, stabilized long-term. Protective sheltering, environmental control measures, monitoring, regular maintenance. Where we bound through the dry grass forever. Instructions for management of wall paintings. My final poem of this nearly solstice reading is a song of healing. It's also the last poem of Bird of Winter, and it ends with the sun rising. O goddess Isis, make me your chick, feed me from your beak. Twice a day, rattle your sistrum, call me back from death. Each spring, reassemble my scattered parts and beat me into the sky on hawk wings. I will be your Horus, hovering above them as they shovel the ashes from fluted columns. I will shake cymbals clear of silence, bury pine cones in the temple floor, raise beloved Osiris. I will offer up my voice until the ibis fly free of the carvings, until the stars of your nipples dissolve night, until the hems of your tunic reveal this sunrise. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alice, for sharing these poems, and particularly for ending with this one, which is so full of hope and, you know, matches the theme of the solstice. So actually, again, I'm going to be selfish and start with my favorite poem. And Oh Goddess Isis is really my favorite poem from this set, because I love poems which are also incantations. And also I love ancient Egypt, I love ancient Rome. So I was wondering how you research all this area to create this very unique poem.
I used a book by Joanne Berry called The Complete Pompeii, which has beautiful 18th century illustrations of the Temple of Isis when it was first excavated, when it was very pristine, and details of the finds. And I really just, it's put together from the details of the actual Temple of Isis in Pompeii, where they had a ceremony twice a day to rattle the sistrum. That was a sort of calling to prayer. A sistrum was the rattle. And what was lovely was the Temple of Isis was like a very inclusive temple, because it was an Egyptian god. Lots of sailors, all sorts of different people worshipped there. So it was, you know, it was for all comers. And it's a very, very precious poem to me, because I had sent Darren, my editor, poems, and she invited me up to lunch in January, when did we have 2020, whenever, just before the pandemic. and 2019, I guess. And I started that poem, and she said she would like to publish my collection. We had lunch in Liverpool together, and then I got the train back to London, and I started that poem on the train, and I really felt someone has heard me, someone has heard my work, and it was just like energy entering me. And that poem holds that energy, and that energy of being heard and being given permission and a channel to sort of translate my work to other people, which is also a work of activism. Now I'm going to ask you about Red Card, which was new to me, and I found it so moving. And I know that one of the subjects that you write about is mental health, and also the challenges that young people face when there are mental health difficulties in their families. So this is, I mean, I can see from a research point of view, your structure is very brilliantly this epic France v Italy World Cup game. And you've made the sort of, what's really interesting to me is you've made the idea of these two teams become the two voices of the poem, and also both converging on watching this match, but seeing it very differently. So could you tell me a bit about your poem, about Red Card?
Yes. So actually, in terms of research, as I was mentioning earlier, I had to double check if I remembered everything well, especially since this, both from a footballistic point of view, this was a final which was really ugly for the French. So I was wondering, am I remembering right? And thank God I double checked some facts, because I got them wrong, and also from an emotional fact. So to be fair to you, this is an autobiographical and biographical poem, since I'm talking about 13-year-old me, and also writing from the point of view of my mom. So yes, so I guess I rewatched a little bit of the final to remember things. So in terms of research, I didn't really research this poem, to be honest. I just, throughout the years, because of what happened to my mom, because of also what happened to a close friend of mine, I visited some psychiatric hospital at some stage on a regular basis. So I did, at the time I was watching, every time there was a documentary about mental health issues, I was watching it out of interest. I read some books as well, but I didn't research all of that for the poem in particular. It just came, many years later. So that's also an interesting thing about research. You can use it a long time after. And I guess, yes, using the experience of other people who went through that, my experience as a visitor, which is still not as legitimate, but you already see things when you go to a psychiatric hospital on a regular basis. And I'm glad Neil is not here tonight, but he actually workshopped this poem. And he told me that so at some stage when he was training as a doctor, he did some internships in a psychiatric hospital, and it looked not, I don't know if you use the word accurate, but it worked for him. He said he really had the impression to be back, and I was glad to hear that, because I didn't want to offend anyone by writing this poem. And I think this is really important. So I'm not sure I answered your question in the end, but
no, you answered it brilliantly, and it's a huge poem. I mean, it's going to be a standout poem when you publish your full collection. So
thank you.
Yeah, no, it's an incredible poem, and we were very privileged to hear you read it.
And I'm particularly interested because you did it with Vesuvius, but other poems in your collection, about the fact that you use a symbol such as a volcano to write such a poignant poems. And I think you also use Pliny the Younger, so classical texts. Can you tell us how you mingled the two to create this specific poem?
Vesuvius is a highly sophisticated combination of Pliny and YouTube. And I wanted to write about Vesuvius. I've read a lot about classical Vesuvius, but there was actually Vesuvius erupted during World War II, and because the Americans were in Italy, they were actually able to, there was resources on site to film it. So there's incredible footage, and the actual description of Vesuvius, of entering the towns, was just me watching a YouTube video and writing down what I saw, and that was really a kind of the descriptions by Pliny and others are very, very strong. But it was really interesting for myself to see it. So it was the two together. And I really wanted the idea, because because Pompeii and the Herculaneum being covered by Vesuvius is very central to Bird of Winter and to my sense of this huge thing descending on me and overwhelming me, and then having to sort of excavate my memories, cast out my younger selves. And then I just thought it was a really good turn at the end to become the volcano, and just think of this energy of transformation and reclamation rising up to speak on behalf of people with my history of childhood sexual abuse and grooming. And I'm not going to stand up and punch my fist in the air, but I'm doing it inside myself.
You should definitely, and exactly that's why I love the image of a volcano. Of course, it's also negative because it destroys so many things, but it's also a reclamation, as you said, of this bursting energy. So there's also, and in case volcanoes are, you know, fertile, the earth around them is fertile, there's soil. So there's also a double, you know, symbol with it that I really love.
Absolutely. No, and going on, I mean, again, you know, your second set was just like a kind of a big present that you were opening one layer at a time because of all this new work. I'd like to ask you, we're at Christmas, people think about angels. Tell me about the Divine Séraphine, this really interesting painter who I never even knew about. What led you to write about her, and how did that poem come together?
So first of all, it was, I think, around 2009 in France, there was a biopic which was released on her, so Séraphine de Senlis, and she had a huge success, which was really nice because she was actually a country girl who just ended up working as a servant in northern France at the beginning of the 20th century. So she received absolutely no education, no basic education, so even less any art education. And she just happened to be the servant of an art dealer who was at the time discovering people like the Douanier Rousseau, so all these very important painters. And he started selling her work, and he was really, really encouraging her to paint. And as I said, unfortunately, with the 1929 crisis, you know, there are less and less people buying art, and she came into oblivion. And unfortunately, as well, she ended up with mental health issues. And she had a bit the same destiny as Camille Claudel. Actually, they're both born and died the same years. And she ended up like Camille Claudel for 20 years in a mental asylum, and she died during World War II, when, you know, in Nazi occupied countries, people with mental health issues were seen as, you know, people who should be exterminated. So basically, like Camille Claudel, they let them starve to death. Basically, that's the way it worked. So I was really happy when I watched the film 12 years ago. I was really happy to discover her work. And there was a book as well, which was released. And during the first lockdown, because I had nothing else to do, I read the biography in just one afternoon. And that's why I thought, okay, I'm going to write about that, because her life was so extraordinary. She was creating her own colors, as I described in the poem. So she was fantastic. She was a bit mystic. She prayed the Virgin Mary a lot. But that's probably why her paintings, I really encourage you to have a look. I'm going to write her name after in the chat to have a look at her work, because it's really amazing and surprising.
And I think it's very strong as women to write about other women who've claimed their spaces as artists. I think when you almost plug into their fire and are strengthened by it, and when you share their art, you're kind of continuing that act of transmission, which is really valuable. And I think for everyone writing from a less represented space, that's a very powerful act to do.
Absolutely. So finally, what other poem interests me particularly? Oh yeah, Benediction, Holistic Conservation, because it's throughout your collection. I love the ability you have to use either medical notes, or in that case, you know, instructions for management of wall paintings, something which sounds like a dry subject, but you manage to manipulate the form or use imagery to make the poem work. So tell us how you did it this time.
Again, it was my reading, and I had a book on Herculaneum and a specific house that was being restored, and they had a kind of inset box of how to holistically conserve paintings. And I was really intrigued by that, because there was very heavy-handed restoration initially, and which was quite grotesque, and you know, sort of 18th century, 19th century. And now people are doing much more delicate, sort of sensitive restoration. And that seemed to me a really valuable way, again, of thinking about how do we live if we are people who have experienced damaging things. How do we treat our former selves do we say we are totally fine, nothing ever went wrong, or do we try and hear them, but also accept that there will be sort of gaps in the narrative, that what is said will be imperfect, and we have to listen into the silences. And it seemed to me that this partially restoring a painting is like leaning into the silences, listening to a partly told story. And when I see crimes for people who have been accused of sexual predation, etc., I see these women telling, and men telling, these stories that necessarily have holes in them, not because they're untruthful, but just because trauma breaks our narratives. And I really wanted to try and think about honoring a story with holes in, an incomplete narrative, and knowing that that was actually its truthfulness, that not the totally refurbished, everything hangs together version, but actually the tentative, delicate, parts missing. That's the way the story can be told. And now I'm going to move on from here to Frog Leap at 10 p.m. on the Via Domitia. All of us are gripped by travel lust at the moment, or I certainly am, and very frustrated travel lust. And so tell us about the Via Domitia. End with us all frog leaping, and then we're going to go to your prompt.
But yes, as you say, it's just last summer I still didn't feel okay about traveling abroad in case there'll be restrictions and everything. So I thought, okay, let's try to be strategic. You're staying in France. Let's try to find a place which is going to make you travel in your mind. So I went to Narbonne, which is still in the southwest of France, but very far away from where I live. So it's not too far away from the Spanish border. So you've got a bit of Spanish culture. And above all, in ancient times, it used to be the first capital of Roman Gaul. And they had just inaugurated during the second of the lockdown, a huge museum with Roman artifacts. And because in France, we had a much longer and stricter lockdown, I think the museum would just reopen as I went there. So I visited that museum, and because it reopened so late, there happened to be a lot of documentaries about that town or the museum when I was on holidays there. So it was perfect. It completely matched. And there was also broadcast on TV. I don't know if you know the Peplum Quo Vadis, which was a film I watched with my granny. So I just love, while traveling there, also traveling on TV thanks to documentaries and a film in ancient Rome, because of course all those travel restrictions were difficult for everyone. But for people like you and I who have a multicultural background, it's also the fact that we cannot travel back to where we come from or where we used to live. And I've felt really frustrated about not being able to go back to the UK or Italy where I lived. So that's really what the poem is all about, this frustration and trying to escape and to travel in your mind when you can't really travel abroad anymore. So I think it's really, that's why I included it in the set tonight. It fits the theme of the evening, really.
It absolutely does. No, well, it's a real treat. And now I'm going to give everyone another treat, and we're going to head over and we're going to have your prompt. So that's going to be our final treat of the evening. So over to you, Julie.
Great. So it's not going to be a prompt that will make you write a poem. It's more about organizing yourself to kickstart some research, but in a different way from Alice. So I would like you, so please, take a piece of paper and a pen, because you're also going to brainstorm and do a sort of mind map. So let me just time it. I would like you to start with, I would like you to identify some poems of yours that need more research, or a poem that you always wanted to write that requires some research, first and foremost. Then I would like you to divide the research you need to do into the following categories. So first, historical research. Maybe you need to do that. Or technical research. For example, you're writing about a poem about your grandfather who worked as a shipbuilder. So maybe you would need to search how ships were built in his time, which techniques were used. Or, like Alice, you don't know how endive grow, so you can search online this kind of things. That's what I mean by technical research. Then think about vocabulary-specific research. For example, if you're writing about textile and you know nothing about it, maybe you need to search the name of fabrics. Would be new vocabulary you could insert into the poem. And the final category, personal research. So either checking your memories if your poem is based on something that happened to you, or if it's about family history, maybe ask people in your family if you really remember it well, or just do your own research, in family archives. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to think about historical research, technical research, vocabulary specific research, and personal research. So now I would like you to make a list of all the potential online resources available that could help you research this topic. So you could start with YouTube channels and blogs, as Alice mentioned about looking for a video of the eruption of the Vesuvius, especially blogs. There are many blogs created by specialists or people who are just passionate about the subject you're researching. Think of museums' websites and their social media pages as well. I know that, for example, the Chateau de Versailles was very active on LinkedIn and YouTube during the lockdowns. They're posting additional resources for people to watch. You can also look for teachers and student resources. For example, I'm teaching something about Northern Irish poetry these days, and the BBC has lots of very accessible resources for both students and teachers alike. You can look for online archives as well. You don't need to be a professional researcher to find things. So some military archives are available online, as well as newspaper archives. For example, newspaperarchives.com or British newspaperarchive.co.uk. It could be a great idea if you're stuck, you don't have any inspiration, to browse randomly some newspapers. And actually, that's what Flaubert did. He based his novel Madame Bovary on a story he read in the local newspaper. So here we go. If Flaubert did it, you can do it. And I would also like you to think of films, TV series, or documentaries dealing with your topic. because even fiction has a degree of accuracy, and it's always useful to see how an artist working with another medium treated the same subject, you know. So don't hesitate. And I would like you to start searching, either to brainstorm right now for a few minutes, or to start searching maybe on Google right now if you want to see, you know, look for a blog or any archives that could be useful. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do it. So start brainstorming either with your paper or on Google right now. Of course, tomorrow and the rest of the week, I would like you to go to your local library and look for magazines, biographies, fiction and non-fiction books dealing with the subject. Again, don't neglect any genre. You can always learn from anything. And finally, I would like you to do some research in your family archives, even if you're not writing about your family. You can look for objects that belong to them and search their story. That's what I did with the poem about the shell being chiseled, you know, about the World War I poem. You can look for photographs as well, because they can give you a lot of information, how people dressed at the time. I know Proust, for example, had a collection of photographs of complete strangers, and apparently he got inspiration from it to create characters. So that can be a tip you could use. Please have a look at letters and notebooks that belong to other family members. And of course, talk to your granny, your aunt, your father. Try to gather family anecdotes, because they make good stories and even more family secrets. So investigate your family archives as well when you can. Outside this exercise, I would just end with, I recommend you to set some clear goals, as you would say, clear, smart research goals for yourself with a deadline, because you cannot also, unless you're writing a whole book about a specific subject, maybe you shouldn't over-research it too much. So for example, set yourself clear goals like, I'm going to spend a month researching 19th century French military fashion by reading this blog, borrowing this book from the library, and I'm going to chat with Granny to see if she remembers what her grandfather told her about his military service. And you know, these are 3 clear goals that you can follow, and you put yourself a deadline, because if you're like me, maybe you do over-research things, and unless you're writing a whole book on the subject, that might not be useful, you know, you have to discard. So don't hesitate to discard the unnecessary details in the final poem, because after all, you're not writing an academic book on the subject. And be organized, I guess, as well. So that's for my brainstorming mind map activity tonight. I can send it to you as well, like Alice, you know, if it's useful. Here we go. So I hope some people are going to get inspiration from it.
That was wonderful, Julie. Absolutely incredible. And it was a breakthrough for me. I had a poem that I'd partly written, and I suddenly realized it was about a Greek pot and a goddess on a Greek pot. And I suddenly realized what it was about. So thank you very much.
Okay, oh, great. I love that when you don't know where a poem is going, you discover it's going into another direction. That's always interesting.
But anyway, I think we're now, unless I've forgotten anything, I don't think we have.
Nope.
We're now at the end of our formal event. We've remembered to do everything. And so I thought we'll just finish by anyone who's got any comments on Julie's wonderful exercise, any questions for Julie, anything whatsoever, chip in before we sign off. And Julie, I'd just like to say thank you so much for an incredible reading. It was really such an honor to be with you tonight and to hear your new poems. And I feel so excited. And yes, remember everyone that to buy Julie's book. And I'm going to add a pin.
Yeah, I think we didn't do the pin stuff really well.
It doesn't matter. I'm just going to say, buy Julie's book. Buy Julie's book. Big message. And the links there. And if you haven't got Bird of Winter, it's 50% off with the code Winter21. Again, I'll put the link up with Liverpool University Press. But not just my book, but everyone's book is 50% off on the Liverpool University Press site. So if you want to pre-order the next Pavilion poetry books, this is the time to do it, because they're £4.99, not £10. So yeah, that was my little plug. And now we're just going to go to everyone and hear your beautiful voices and see your beautiful faces. And yes, any questions for the wonderful Julie?
Julie, I was just wondering, I found that really helpful because I think I've always thought of like research and poetry as two very separate things. So that's been super helpful for me. But I was just wondering how your process goes from all the research to actually getting things down on paper and how you then go about refining that. Like, what does your timeline look like?
Yes, I think it's a bit my flaw. That's why I think it was more for myself. I was advising don't over research, edit the unnecessary details, because I love researching. That's why I'm doing a PhD. I love research. And I think, I would have a tendency in the first drafts to include too many details, too much information, which are not necessarily necessary in the end for the poem to work. That's what I'm doing right now for a poem. And I think in my case, after several drafts, I start being a bit tougher and realize, that I'm not supposed to write an academic book on this subject, so it's not necessarily meant to be didactic. So I managed to kill my darlings little by little after several drafts. But that's why I would say, maybe if you're a bit like me, don't over-research, or set yourself a deadline, maybe not to watch too many documentaries, read too many books, because in the end, poetry is also about imagery or rhythm. It's not about looking clever, really. Even if it's always interesting, to put nice details. But if you're like me, set yourself deadlines and goals, smart goals, I guess. Thank you, Kate, for your question. Also, if you have any question for Alice, it doesn't need to be one after the other. Go for it.
Can I ask, thank you for that information, Julie. That's absolutely brilliant. And the deadlines are not to over research. I think that's really hard to keep doing it, but that's great. So thank you for that. And I loved your poems very much. They're by my bedside always, I wanted to ask also Alice, two things really. One was on, not so much on your poem, was about the doctor's notes. I wanted to ask you, when you got them, were they, as far as you know, any redactions in them? Had they been erased, some things been erased that you knew about?
They were, I honestly don't know what happened to them. They were substantially incomplete. So I don't know whether they were lost or whether that they were simply destroyed and I was never given a full set of records. And they were, the GP who had the paper file, they vanished when they were supposed to send them on to my current GP. So huge chunks of my notes are missing, and as I say, I have no idea whether they were redacted or not, or whether they were simply put in the bin, whether that was that form of brutal reduction, but they are significantly reduced. I've got sort of sample letters rather than of all my treatment for anorexia. Yeah, there's practically like 2 letters. I don't know what happened to the rest.
Wow.
So it's a very holy narrative. And I've spent a lot of time trying to extract them with absolutely no success whatsoever.
Right.
No one will tell me even where the paper file went. It's a tricky area.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I've had something similar, except I can see where they've redacted it. But and it was really interesting that you said you put them away and not. I think it was very interesting. And the other question was, but it's not. You didn't read it, so I wasn't going to ask anything much. But Mirror, your Mirror poem.
Yeah.
I read it the other night and just blown away. Like, I've been reading your poems carefully, you know, over the weeks and months and that. But I came back to this Mirror one. And I think you'd written about it somewhere else, yeah. And to put what you've written about it, and also, you know, how you put it, it's just one of the most extraordinary poems with erasure that I've ever seen. You know, it shows what you can do with that form, and it's just brilliant. It's just brilliant. There's so much in it. There's just so much in it. It's almost a novel, and it's just incredible. I just don't know how you do it. I just wanted to say that.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, Chaucer. I really wanted to catch that split between the top surface of a teenage girl who I described through the caption of a painting of a young girl in profile looking at something, and this sort of academic caption of a wall painting in Pompeii of this beautiful young girl. And then I just sort of interpose it with the way that I just used to go for my face and really attack it. And at a time when I couldn't articulate in words what had happened to me, you know, I was just really going for my face instead. I was defacing myself. And when I was growing up in the 70s, self-harm was a much smaller field, and it wasn't really discussed, and that wasn't really so much sort of cutting and things, but I definitely had that sense of just trying to talk through my body because my mouth didn't have any words, and yet I needed to give witness. And I think that's, you know, that was just something I'm really glad that something about it spoke to you. But again, everything that I do, I'm really trying to use myself as a portal to look at a wider experience, because I know that different versions of what happened to me happen to other people.
And it's just a classic, you know, it's just so spare. I mean, you write sparely, which is really interesting. But yeah, I just wanted to say that. Wow. I mean, both your books are just stunning. Your vastness, Julie, you're wide. With you, you just go out and out and out. I love both of these collections and pamphlets. I love them both.
Well, we love yours, Chaucer. You know, In an Ideal World, I'd Not Be Murdered has been one of my standout reads of 2020. And again, you know, giving witness to the lives of people who have worked in prostitution and are living beyond that and claiming their humanity within that field is such an important act to do, and to give a sense of what can lead you to that place and how you retain a sense of self in that place is really, really important. And I know that Julie feels as strongly as I do about, you know, the value of your work and the value of our collective group. So it's, you know, it's lovely to hear from you, but we, you know, we are your fans, Chaucer.
Yeah, well, you're mine. Yeah, yes. Well, I wouldn't have been able to do some of it without you.
No, well, we are a collective. You know, we are a collective. She says, making all the faces come back. So,
thank you. Yeah.
And no, well, I think that's a great place to end our our formal meeting, and I'm just going to, close. We'll have by thanking everyone who's been here tonight. I'm going to stop the recording shortly, but it's been amazing to share this space with you and to share it with everyone who will be listening afterwards. You can see all our faces together. We are collective, we write together, we support each other, and we hope that cultural activism is going to spread out to all of you and allow all of you to voice your silences. So thank you very much for being here, for being part of it. And thank you to the amazing Julie Irigaray for being such a brilliant reader tonight.
Thank you, Alice, for inviting me, for organizing everything, for sharing your wonderful work as well, of course.
And, may the next year be better for all of us. and bye-bye for now. But I'm going to stop the recording.
I'll let you do it.